The low sun painted the hospital room in shades of gold, highlighting Anna's serene countenance. She lay in the bed, fragile and pale, yet with a calm expression that contrasted with the situation. Beside her, John gently held her hand, a gesture of comfort and silent promise. Michael, just 7 years old, stood at the foot of the bed. His gaze was confused and sad, unable to fully grasp the gravity of the moment. Anna turned slightly toward John, her eyes showing a mix of love and concern. With a weak but firm voice, she whispered, each word filling the room with a gentle urgency. "John, promise me you'll take care of our little Michael. He needs you to show him the world I dreamed for him." John squeezed Anna's hand, his eyes brimming with emotion. "I promise, my dear, he will never be alone." A sad, satisfied smile touched Anna's lips upon hearing the promise. She slowly closed her eyes, her breathing becoming ever softer until it stopped altogether, leaving only a peaceful stillness in the room. Michael looked up at John, his small voice trembling with the innocence of childhood. "Is Grandma coming home with us?" John crouched beside Michael, wrapping the boy in his arms. He struggled to keep his voice steady, pain and love mixing in his words. "She will always be with us, my boy, right here." John placed his hand over Michael's heart, encouraging him to feel more than just the loss. The moment was only interrupted by the sound of birds outside, singing a soft lament. The room fell silent, with only the sound of restrained breathing and the promise that, despite the pain, life must go on for those who remained. The cemetery was tranquil, almost desolate, under a heavy sky of gray clouds. John, with red eyes and an unshaven face, held Michael's hand firmly, the boy dressed in a small black suit. Around them, a few of Anna's friends and family gathered silently, their somber expressions reflecting the gravity of the moment. The priest recited farewell prayers, his voice a constant murmur against the sound of the wind whispering among the trees. As the words echoed, John kept his gaze fixed on Anna's coffin, now being slowly lowered into the ground. A tear escaped, tracing a path down his face, but he made no move to wipe it away. Michael, still too young to fully understand the loss, looked at the open grave with sad curiosity. His puzzled expression did not change, even as the first shovel of dirt fell onto the coffin with a dull thud. The boy tugged at John's coat sleeve, an unasked question hanging between them. The group began to disperse after the ceremony ended, each immersed in their own silence. John thanked everyone for their presence with brief nods, his voice almost inaudible. When the last of the visitors had left, he crouched beside Michael, who still stood motionless, staring at the freshly covered earth. "Let's go home, son," John said softly, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. He took Michael's small hand and guided him out of the cemetery. The way back mirrored their thoughts, silent, long, and mournful. As they got into the car, Michael sat in the back seat, staring blankly out the window as the landscape passed. The houses and trees were just blurred streaks through his silent tears. John, driving, let the road take him, lost in memories of happier days with Anna. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, each kilometer adding to the weight of the silence between them. The sound of the engine was the only thing filling the space, a constant hum that somehow seemed both distant and intrusively close. Upon arriving home, John parked the car and turned off the engine, but neither of them made any move to get out. They sat there, the silence a heavy veil between them. Finally, John turned and looked at Michael, their eyes meeting in the rearview mirror. "We'll be okay, Michael. We'll find a way," he murmured, more to himself than to the boy. Unbuckling his seatbelt, he got out of the car and opened the door for Michael, reaching out to help him down. Together, they walked to the front door of their home, a place once filled with laughter, and now echoing only with memories. The key turned in the lock with a click, and the door opened to the beginning of a new life without Anna. Michael held John's hand more tightly, seeking comfort in the only constancy he had left. Dawn breaks, and the sound of the alarm shatters the silence of the small house. John, with deep dark circles under his eyes, struggles to rise from bed, while Michael, still asleep, murmurs something unintelligible. In the simple bedroom, where memories of Anna still live in photos and small objects, John manages a sad smile upon seeing her image on the dresser. In the kitchen, John prepares breakfast. The aroma of fresh coffee blends with the scent of toast, but the silence is only broken by the ticking of the clock. Michael sits at the table, staring absently at his plate, moving his fork without interest. "Come on, Mike, you need to eat something," John encourages, trying to disguise his own lack of appetite. After breakfast, John dedicates himself to tidying up the house. He picks up Michael's toys, washes the dishes, and checks the grandson's backpack, ensuring nothing is missing. Each gesture is a reminder of the weight of responsibility he now carries alone. Later in the backyard, John is busy organizing recyclable materials he collected the day before. Plastic bottles, cans, and papers are sorted meticulously, but the physical effort is evident on his face. He pauses for a moment, leaning on the work table, closing his eyes as longing for Anna envelops him. He takes a deep breath and resumes his work, but is interrupted by Michael's shout from inside the house. "Grandpa, come see this," calls Michael, with more excitement in his voice than John had heard in weeks. John wipes his hands on his apron and runs inside, finding Michael in the living room with an illustrated book open. "Look, Grandpa, these places! Grandma said she wanted to show me all this." John's expression softens. He sits beside Michael, putting an arm around the boy's shoulders. "And we will see them one day, my boy. We'll visit every place your grandma dreamed of showing you." They spend the rest of the afternoon together, flipping through the book. For John, each page is a promise to Anna, each word a bridge between the past and the future. As the sun sets, casting long shadows through the room, John feels, even if just for a brief moment, that perhaps he can fulfill the promise made to Anna. They would face many challenges, but for now, they were together, and that was enough. The following morning starts gray, with the sky threatening rain. John, still in bed, feels every muscle ache more than usual. He takes a deep breath, thinking of Anna, and forces himself to get up. His movements are slow, reflecting the pain spreading through his body. As he looks in the mirror, the marks of time and fatigue are clear on his face. He prepares a simple coffee and calls for Michael, who appears sleepy and disheartened. "Come on, champ. We have a big day ahead," John says with a forced smile. Michael nods, but his eyes wander unfocused, still trying to understand the changes in his life. In the garage, John looks at the pile of items he needs to collect and deliver. He tries to lift a heavier box and feels a sharp twinge in his back. With a muffled groan, he leans on the table, taking deep breaths. "Just one more effort," he murmurs to himself. He opts to carry lighter items, though it means more trips and less money. While John makes his deliveries, panting and slower than usual, Michael stares at the board in school, trying to follow the lesson, but the words seem to dance before his eyes. A teacher approaches, gently placing an illustrated book in front of him, trying to capture his attention. Michael smiles faintly, but his mind is elsewhere. At the end of the day, with the sky already darkening, John and Michael meet at home. John prepares a simple meal, while Michael draws at the kitchen table. There's a brief moment of tranquility, a respite in the storm of their lives. John watches Michael, his heart tight with thoughts of the future. "Hey, champ, how about we go to the park tomorrow? It could be fun," John suggests, trying to maintain a light tone. Michael looks at him with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Can we bring the drawing book? Asks Michael, his eyes finally showing something akin to enthusiasm. Of course we can, John replies, a genuine smile lighting his weary face. He knows the challenges are just beginning, but he promises himself and to Anna's memory that he will do everything in his power to give Michael the life she dreamed for him, even if that means facing each new day with the pain and fatigue that plague him. The important thing is to keep going for Michael. Plans to go to the park are interrupted the next day. In the cloudy afternoon, John, while sorting through found objects for recycling, feels a sudden dizziness. Cold sweat covers his forehead as he struggles to maintain balance, leaning on the cart that once served as a support at work, now nearly a lifeline to prevent falling. Michael, playing with a toy car nearby, notices the change in his grandfather's posture and stops, looking at him with concern. "Grandpa, are you okay?" Michael's voice carries a mix of innocence and fear. Without answering, John tries to smile to reassure his grandson, but his vision begins to darken. Struggling, he murmurs, "Michael, go! Go call Mrs. Maria, quick!" Michael, hesitant, looks around. The neighbor, Mrs. Maria, usually tends to her garden at this hour. With uncertain steps, the boy runs toward the neighboring house, tripping over his own legs, moved by the urgency the situation demands. Mrs. Maria, seeing Michael so distressed, drops her gardening tools and rushes to John. She finds him gasping and pale, leaning against the cart. "John, what happened? I'm calling an ambulance!" While medical help is yet to arrive, neighbors begin to gather around John, whispering among themselves about the tough situation he and Michael have been facing. The news spreads quickly through the neighborhood, and the expressions of concern are palpable. The ambulance arrives and paramedics attend to John efficiently, while the community watches in silence. Michael, by Mrs. Maria's side, holds her hand, seeking some comfort. At the hospital, while John is taken for exams, Michael sits in the waiting room surrounded by neighbors who take turns comforting him. Solidarity begins to take shape. Discussions about how they can further help the old friend and his grandson start to arise. "He never asked for anything from anyone, always taking care of that boy alone," comments Mr. Carlos, an old neighbor. "Yeah, but now it's time for us to help them, right?" replies Mrs. Marta, always present at community events. The scene closes with Michael looking at the door through which John disappeared, holding a toy car, a symbol of his still-present childhood. The worry in his gaze is clear, but the presence of neighbors brings a glimpse of hope. Back from the hospital, after a long night admitted, John now rests on the sofa, covered by a faded blanket. The room is filled with the soft sound of conversations and laughter. On the coffee table, a profusion of dishes with cakes and pies offered by the neighbors. Michael, playing with a car on the floor, seems more at ease with the visitors coming and going. Maria, the next-door neighbor, sits beside John and holds his hand warmly. "Maria, John, you are not alone. Look at all of us here. We're with you." John smiles, his face marked by fatigue, but his eyes gleam with new hope. "John, I didn't know we had so many friends." "Thank you, Maria. This means a lot to us, especially for Michael." As they talk, a group of neighborhood teenagers enters, bringing games and books for Michael. They squat next to the boy, explaining each game with patience and kindness. One of them says, "Michael, let's see which of these games you like best. This one is about building things. You're going to love it." Michael shyly smiles and nods his head. John watches the scene, tears accumulating in the corners of his eyes. Back in the room, Michael, now surrounded by new friends, begins to open up, participating in the games and laughing. John observes everything, his heart warmed by the affection and solidarity of the community. John, thoughtful, speaks more to himself, but loud enough for Maria to hear. "Anna always said that people have kindness in their hearts. I was starting to doubt, but look at this. She was right." That day, Despite the uncertainty about his health and his ability to care for Michael, John felt stronger and happier, realizing he was not alone. There was a group of people willing to help him. He, as a humble collector of recyclable materials, felt at that moment like a wealthy man, understanding that friendship was his greatest wealth.